The pocket watch of a noble who once ruled over Mondstadt. The time it tells is still accurate. Punctuality is a virtue, and this pocket watch helped the nobles stay on a virtuous path. It was more for self-discipline than a tool to influence the common folk. At daybreak, a worthy noble must be more vigilant than his people. At night, he should be more thoughtful and restless than they. Over the years, the once strict schedule was overturned by their insolent descendants. Their timepieces grew more extravagant, but lost their virtuous function. The Royal Pocket Watch. Yellow, Zane here, and today we're going to be covering the rise and fall of Mondstadt's nobles. This is part 2 of a series I'm doing on the complete history of Mondstadt, so be sure to watch the episode 1 first. If you enjoy these episodes and want to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can watch the next one when it comes out. Without further ado, get your snacks and let's get into it, shall we? When we left Mondstadt last, we were 2,600 years before present day. Its people had just been freed by the Revolution, and Barbados had made them a new land to inhabit. When Barbados finished, he told them to live freely and ventured off to new lands. With his departure, however, it left a power vacuum in the city, and soon common people stepped up to rule the land, forming noble houses and taking up the task of running the new city. These new leaders were welcomed with open arms. After all, they were once common people themselves. The nobles swore by the principles of noblesse oblige, a name you may recognize. It's French for nobility obligates, a phrase that means the nobility has an obligation to the people below them. In turn for the great wealth and power they gained by holding positions of privilege, they would help the people they governed above all else, and give back to the people who were not nearly as fortunate. They'd share their wisdom and earnings, their festivals and parties, everything for the people. During this time, Mondstadt experienced a great boom, with knowledge and riches flowing into the city. No man or woman was left behind in this great expansion. No one suffered under tyranny, no one wasn't free. The great mages of Mondstadt were known throughout the land, tutoring the nobles' children and teaching them the just ways of rule. Of course, with great power being passed down through only bloodline, things tend to sour eventually. One clan, named Clan Lawrence, slowly begun to take more and more for themselves. The people of Mondstadt didn't mind all too much at first. These were the nobles who they'd been living in tandem with for over 1,000 years, and they had their best interests in mind, right? Slowly, many noble houses, following Clan Lawrence's lead, began to close themselves off from the public. Over generations, the nobles took away more and more fiefdoms from the people, growing fat off of their work while giving nothing back. The knowledge the noble families once willingly shared with the people was locked away in basements and attics of rich men who hoarded it for themselves. This was a city built on the idea of freedom, but yet the people were being slowly suffocated, not even knowing their freedoms were being violated until they had no power left to resist. Only then did the noble houses show their true colors, their debauchery and their decadence on full display. The festivals of Mondstadt that were supposed to celebrate the freedom of the city were little more than outlets for the nobles' ever-growing depravity. At some such festivals, they even forced young maidens into sex with some of the nobles for winning a prize at the festival. Of course, the common people were never allowed to go to these. They were far too busy toiling, so the nobles could eat cake and sip wine while they starved in the streets. The City of Freedom was enslaved, in all but name, to tyrants who cared only about themselves. Around this time, slavery was introduced to Mondstadt, and before long, the noble houses had countless slaves for their work and entertainment. They were even forced to fight each other to the death, think Roman Colosseum, with the prize of earning freedom dangled in front of them, never to be achieved. Even poems and songs were not safe from the clutches of nobles. Before Mondstadt was rife with corruption, bards were a staple of the city. They told stories and the history of old to a new generation, so by stifling them, the nobles managed to erase great swathes of Mondstadt history and culture, an act the city is not fully recovered from even now. This policy would not go unnoticed, though. For one day, a chance meeting of wanderers would begin a group known as the Swordsmen Troop. This party was made up of 4 members, and together they would roam the world, playing music and exploring wherever caught their fancy. This relates back to the main story, I swear. Just hear me for a bit, will ya? The first member, and the only one we know the name of, is Cruisland. He was born of Clan Lawrence, but unlike so many of his kin, he spoke out against their tyranny, and for that he was banished. He wielded the bell, a clockwork greatsword that served both as a weapon and an instrument. The clockwork kept perfect rhythm with the beat, even in combat. The second member, and the one we know the least about, was known only as the Conductor. He wielded the Witst, a tome which held stories of their travels. It was also his weapon, and with it, even the most devastating of spells would sound beautiful. The third member, the Dawn's-Light Swordswoman, was described as courageous to a fault, and even when things seemed grim, she never lost hope. Her weapon was the flute, the sword which played music when swung, although that didn't make it any less deadly. The final member, and arguably the most tragic, was the Sojourner. He hailed from Fontaine, and although he held a noble position in the country's court, he left his home without even a goodbye, embracing his wandering spirit and potentially leaving some past tragedy behind. It is said he wore a flower to remind himself to love no one else and to be attached to nothing, although that flower would one day come off. He used the stringless, a bow with, ironically, many strings, that played music as an arrow flew out. In his travels, he met the other three and completed their troop. This band of adventurers would last for many years, and rumors of their existence made it into the caged city of Mondstadt. The suppressed people latched onto the stories, and before long, many in Mondstadt knew of them and their adventures. That's all well and good, but how does this relate to the main story here at all? Besides the obvious part of them being free musicians and that being illegal in Mondstadt, remember how we touched on the crimes committed during Mondstadt's festivals towards maidens? By chance, the Sojourner met one of them on his travels, and instantly fell for her. The maiden wore a grimace their entire conversation, and when the Sojourner pressed her for a reason, she explained her fate. He then brought the maiden to the troop, who were at the time playing in a bar. There, the Sojourner and his troop made a promise they couldn't keep. I've never known you to smile, after all. Not even once. I will break the chains that bind you, and when that time comes, would you let me see you smile? Yes, and thank you. It would be wonderful indeed if you could do that for me. Pretty words, but who could trust them, coming from a singer? That night would be the last time the group reveled together. For the next morning, they set out for Mondstadt, one goal in mind. They would storm the city and impose the death sentence upon its tyrannical rulers. Through the city streets they marched, felling scores of guards, but in the end, they were only 4 against an endless tide of oppression. The Conductor fell first, his tome held firm in his hands even when the life had left his eyes. The Swordswoman and Cruzland fought on, but they too were eventually captured, leaving only the Sojourner left. He fought on till the end, his arrows and his songs long exhausted, before he too was finally brought low, a nameless revolutionary in a foreign land. He didn't care about that, though. He only regretted never getting the chance to see his beloved smile before the end. This may be the point where the troop was disbanded, but their story does not end here. The video, however, does. Join me next time for part 3, where we speak of the fate of the final 2 members, and of the second and final rebellion. Hope your snack was good, and so was the story. Have a good one, y'all. Bye-bye.